to City Connection. It's Monday, March 3, and I'm your host, Allison Donahue. Brought to you by the Grand Rapids Community Media Center, this live program connects you directly with our city officials, giving you the chance to hear about the latest developments and ask questions about the issues that matter most to you. Joining us today are Mayor David LaGrand and Arielle Leipham Ellis, the Fulton Heights representative on the Uptown Grand Rapids Inc. board and a member of Friends of Slow Streets. We'll be diving into an important conversation about biking and pedestrian safety in Grand Rapids. But first, let's go over some of the latest updates from around Grand Rapids. The City of Grand Rapids Office of Emergency Management is hosting a series of community preparedness workshops to help residents strengthen their disaster readiness and resilience. These workshops provide an opportunity for attendees to discuss their concerns, share personal experiences, and learn practical strategies for emergency preparedness. 2 workshops remain in the series, and all residents, whether attending or not, are encouraged to participate in a citywide survey open through this month. More details, including workshop dates and locations, can be found on the city website. The city recently announced administrative leadership updates with several new appointments and changes. James Hurt, Managing Director of Public Services, retired after a 26-year career with the City of Grand Rapids last month. Annabelle Wilkinson was appointed as the city's Chief Sustainability Officer, managing the city's sustainability, climate change, and environmental justice programs. Brandon Davis was appointed to serve as Managing Director, overseeing the city's Office of Equity and Engagement and the city's Office of Oversight and Public Accountability, which he led the establishment of in 2018. Davis has served in an interim capacity overseeing both departments since November 2023. Happy Women in Construction Week. Starting today, Grand Rapids has launched the 2025 construction season with the South Division Avenue Reconstruction Project, which involves installing a new water main, replacing lead water services, reconstructing the street, and narrowing the street to slow traffic. The finished street will include wider sidewalks, ornamental streetlights, new traffic signals, 79 new street trees, and raised bike lanes level with the sidewalk. Other major street reconstruction projects include on Leonard, Ann, Boston, and Plainfield. Residents can learn more and provide feedback at the construction season kickoff event on March 25 at Union High School from 5:30 to 7 p.m. The annual Donut Dash 5K is taking place tomorrow, Tuesday, March 4, starting at 6 p.m. at the Red Lion Neon parking lot on Bridge Street. It's a free event with stops all along the way for punchki. Every punchki consumed, up to 3. Participants earn entries into a prize drawing, plus 1 entry just for attending. Donations support the Grand Rapids Police Foundation. Pre-registration required. More information on the city's website. As part of the Michigan Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act, the City of Grand Rapids will receive $1.4 million this year in state marijuana tax revenue. Local leaders are discussing how to allocate these funds, as this tax revenue going to cities, townships, and counties is at the discretion of municipal leaders. In other local marijuana news, 6 local dispensary owners are suing the City of Grand Rapids over its cannabis social equity program, which was adopted in 2020 to address the historical impacts of the war on drugs. While participation in the program is voluntary, once a dispensary submits a plan, it becomes legally enforceable with non-compliance, resulting in a 3% penalty on gross revenue or a risk of losing their license. The dispensary owners argue that the policy places an unfair burden on the businesses. Wood TV8 reported out this story if you want some more details. Mayor David LaGrand is continuing to invite residents to participate in Mayor's Mondays, an opportunity for conversation between the mayor and his constituents. This month is focused on infrastructure and neighborhood development. The first session of the month is tonight, 5:30 to 7 p.m. at West Michigan Hispanic Chamber of Commerce on Division Ave. A few upcoming community events to highlight, scheduled for March 13. This march honors the Cesar E. Chavez and promotes social justice within the community. The march will begin at West Michigan Hispanic Center and spans the length of Cesar E. Chavez Avenue Southwest, ending at Potter's House School on Clyde Park Avenue Southwest. Following the march, there will also be a unity gathering and a luncheon hosted at Potter's House Chapel. Taking place on March 15, Irish Off Ionia is Michigan's largest St. Patrick's Day street festival. This 21 and up event is taking place at Calder Plaza instead of on Ionia this year, hence the name change. The annual St. Patrick's Day Parade is set for March 15, beginning at 11 a.m. on Monroe Avenue at Lion Street, ending at Veterans Memorial Park. That's it for city updates. When we come back from the break, we'll be joined by Grand Rapids Mayor David LaGrand and Arielle Leipham Ellis, the Fulton Heights representative on the Uptown Grand Rapids Inc. board and a member of Friends of Slow Streets, to talk about biking and pedestrian safety here in Grand Rapids.
For over 30 years after humble beginnings as a public access TV station, the Community Media Center has grown to be an active, multi-platform media and technology assistance organization, encouraging and enabling our community to push the creative boundaries. We power a variety of resources, including a music-centered community radio station, WYCE, a community venue with stage and screen at Wealthy Theater, citizen-driven journalism with the Rapidian, a web development team empowering local nonprofits, an education department that trains and broadens students' minds, and a free speech public access television studio, GRTV, where it all began. By introducing audiences to new voices and ideas, we enhance community engagement and create connections between artists and audiences, enriching our city's cultural offerings. We empower and collaborate with platforms and resources accessible to all and used by all. Every free democratic society depends on media, accessible to the community and uncensored by government. The Community Media Center continues this work for the media landscape of today and tomorrow. These platforms and services empower our neighbors to tell their stories and explore the richness of culture that Grand Rapids has to offer. Connect, discover, learn, create, and share. The Grand Rapids Community Media Center.
Welcome back to City Connection. I'm your host, Allison Donahue, joined in this session of the show by Mayor David LaGrand. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show, really. Thanks for joining us. So this month we're talking about bike safety, pedestrian safety here in Grand Rapids. I know this is a topic that's near and dear to your heart as someone who walks everywhere. I've
Yep.
seen you on the streets. Just to kick us off, what would you say are the most pressing safety concerns for cyclists and pedestrians in Grand Rapids today?
You know, if you were going to compress it down to one thing, it's probably speed. So in general, everything gets better as cars slow down a critical 5 or 10 miles an hour, and ways to manage it and make that happen are probably at the root of most of the things that we need to do better. Now there's some other common sense things. One of the advantages, I just don't think there's any substitute for the discipline of doing it. If you walk places, you notice walking issues. If you bike places, you notice bikeability issues. So it's one of the reasons I'm really committed to not just walking, but biking around town as much as I can. So I biked to work this morning.
Yeah, and we posted we got a lot of feedback from folks. I know it's a topic that folks are really interested in as well.
Yeah.
So Grand Rapids, along with the Grand Valley Metro Council, adopted the Vision Zero 2050 strategy in 2018, which is a roadmap on how to redesign our streets, change policies, and improve safety in order to eliminate traffic-related deaths by 2050. Sounds like a big lift. Are you aware of what progress has been made or where we're falling short on that?
Well, A, we've made progress, and B, we are falling short. I think I would like us to get to a point where we have zero pedestrian or cyclist deaths, next year, if we could. I think 2050 is a long time in the future, so I think that goal is needlessly cautious. Now, I will say, essentially, everything that we're doing in the city has been reflective of, I think, a lot of good national thinking on the topic. So if you look at even how there's some fun new sort of geeky ideas in the space, like for example, if you think of an intersection, and intersections are largely where bad things happen, then right now what we do is we ask pedestrians to sort of go down into danger, like they're at an elevated sidewalk level, and then they go down and they're curb cut and they go down into this intersection. Well, if you're on a car, an intersection pretty much looks like the same as every other part of the street. So it's not, you don't get many visual or subliminal cues that you're in potentially shared space. So a great solution to that is to just raise up the entire intersection, so that the whole intersection is sort of a speed table. So it's not a speed hump. It doesn't give anybody, car sickness when they get up on it. But you just sort of go, if cars have to go up under another level, and they're at the level that streets are at, you get a couple benefits out of that. One is cars then get the basic message that, oh, there might be pedestrians in this intersection. Oh, I should treat this a little different than I treat the other part of the road space. The other benefit you get for pedestrians is, and again, this is geeky stuff, but the number one place people slip and fall is at curb cuts, because it's a slope down, you get water in it, in the winter the water freezes, it's a great slip and fall potential. Now, if you just if you could leave the sidewalk at that higher level, those puddles all go away. That's a cool idea that's emerged in the last few years, and you can already see Grand Rapids starting to work on those ideas on some of its projects. So the answer is a lot of good thinking is going into this. I have a sense of urgency about all of this, because I think right now, if I were to say one thing, it'd be that we've tended to rely on traditional engineering and construction tools, maybe more than we should, because those tools are slow. If we said, let's redesign Michigan Street, well, if we, 100% were committed to redesigning Michigan Street today, it would take 3 years maybe. It would take a long time, and it would be very disruptive. It would take, so if you're a business on Michigan Street, do you really want Michigan Street to be ripped up for 3 years? Well, if you can get a lot of the good things you would want out of a street design without a complete tear up, then you don't have to wait for it, you don't have to engineer for it, and you don't have to disrupt businesses. So there's good thinking in this space that says, there are lots of things you can do that don't involve these huge traditional investments, which means you can do them a lot faster. So that's, I think, the next frontier.
Raising the street up to sidewalk level then. then you wouldn't have to rip up the entire street, you would just rip up at the intersection.
Well, you wouldn't even rip it up, you're adding a layer of asphalt,
Oh,
so it's
okay.
actually not that hard to do, right?
Yeah.
Adding asphalt's easy. Subtracting or, resurfacing is much more complicated.
Yeah. So you mentioned restructuring, redesigning some streets. One street that is starting today on a big redesign is South Division. And part of that is going to benefit folks that ride bikes down South Division, walk down South Division.
Hope so.
And one of the plans is also to slow down traffic, which is hopefully beneficial. Can you talk a little bit more about how widening a street like it is planned on South Division will slow traffic?
Well, generally speaking, widening doesn't. And so I think we have to have conversations where we make sure we're really getting it right. I don't think we want to be done with those conversations. Now, sometimes, for example, there's lots of good data that 10-foot wide lane just inherently makes cars go slower than a 12-foot wide lane. If you give people really wide lanes, they treat things like they're highways. There's all kinds of evidence of that. And so probably the simplest thing we can do in the city to make things slower and safer is just simply to narrow lanes. Now, narrowing lanes, if you also want to incorporate bicycling facilities, for example, might mean widening your road by 2 feet, for example. Let's say you had a 4-lane road and it was 4 12-foot lanes. Well, 4 times 12 is 48. You narrow that to 4 10-foot lanes and you've got 8 feet. Well, 8 feet probably isn't enough for a standalone bike lane on both sides of the street with decent separation. So maybe you decide you need a total of 50 feet, not the 48 you had before. So the road gets widened 2 feet. But what you're actually getting is, you're actually getting 2 cycling highways along the side of your car lanes. That's a major, major shift in terms of, safety for bikes, and you may as well call it access, because, as a cyclist, I know if you feel like you're going to die, you don't take roads. So there are roads I'm just really, really hesitant to take my bike on because median traffic's going 55 miles an hour and it's kind of a scary experience. And I don't want to have to get an e-bike that'll go 55 so I can match car traffic. If I did, I'd buy a motorcycle. That's not what I want to do. I want to go reasonable speeds, 20, 25 max.
So we're entering into spring, but as we know, that doesn't mean the snow stops. And one thing that stops folks from biking is the snow, and especially snow-covered bike lanes. There was an article I read from Bridge Detroit recently about cyclists in Detroit being ticketed for biking in the road when the bike lanes were filled with snow and ice. Is that an issue here in Grand Rapids?
I have not heard that happening. There's obviously, in how you write your code, like I certainly wouldn't want a code that insisted that bikes can't be in car lanes if there's a bike lane for about 3 reasons. One of them is one you just mentioned, and that is, we have winter, and until we come up with a really good, reliable way of doing snow removal in bike lanes, you've got no alternative sometimes. Another one is we've got to do really effective road clearance in bike lanes because cars can go over gravel and not care that much. If you've ever biked through a patch of gravel, it's really, really dangerous, and debris tends to migrate out towards the edges of roads. That's just naturally what happens. Well, if you put your bike lanes on the edge, what you're essentially saying is, hey, go bike in the most dangerous part of the roadway, which is not necessarily what you want to say. Another possibility is if your bike lanes just aren't, if they're not integrated well enough, sometimes you're going to make your choice to get out of a bike lane before the bike lane actually ends. So for example, let's say you know that across this intersection your bike lane goes away. Well, it makes a lot of sense for a bike at that point to get out into traffic so they can signal to cars, hey, I'm here, don't run me over when we go across the intersection. So there are lots of ways where, we're never gonna have a perfectly designed streetscape. We're always gonna have to do better. But I know as a cyclist, there are those moments when you realize, oh, the bike lane's going away. How do I signal to the cars that I'm going to have to become I'm going to have to integrate into the car lane at the other side of this intersection, or there's, or someone left trash in the bike lane. I mean, there are lots of reasons why you've got to be a little careful about bike lanes, because again, if somebody throws a bag of garbage out in the street and my car hits it, I'm annoyed. I'm probably not going to need body work. It's maybe, a little scary. If I run into a bag of trash on my bike, bad things are going to happen. So cyclists just have to be a lot more sensitive to road conditions than cars, just because they're inherently a less, protected and stable form of transportation.
In Grand Rapids, we have a few different kinds of bike lanes. Do you have a personal preference?
Well, of course. I mean, if you're a cyclist, what you really love is hard separated bike lanes that really have a curb between you and cars, so you really have space that no one's going to mess with you in. Now, those can be designed in ways that you can get unintended effects. So if they're designed so that cars open their car doors into a very narrow bike lane that was separated, you can imagine that would be a problem. If you had a bike lane that wasn't long enough to be useful, that's not great. But that's sort of the gold standard. That's your dream, is a hard separated lane. They're not going to be available everywhere. We're not going to have the ability to do them everywhere. And frankly, when you think about a standard sort of quiet side street, do you really need them? You probably don't. So you need them for major thoroughfares. It'd be a little bit like, we have separated highway, we have limited access highways. If you think of a hard separated bike lane as sort of the limited access highway of biking, to get you from point A to point B on the most efficient route. The other thing, my favorite bike lanes are always the ones that respect that the shortest distance is between anything is between 2 points is a straight line. So cities are laid out on right angle grids, and we have some 45-degree streets, like Lake Drive is a great example. And those streets are really nice if you're a cyclist, because you physically spend less time on the road. So that's a way more in a car, it's maybe not, it doesn't feel like that big a deal maybe to not take the angled streets. It's a big deal if you're providing your own, if every block you go involves you pushing the pedals, you'd rather get there quicker, more directly.
So for those bike lanes that have the hard separation, and we're on the west side now, I know there's one over here on Turner? Is that what it is? How many do we have like that in Grand Rapids? I'm guessing that's got to be the least kind of
not very many. And one of the challenges with that one, I think, was it actually may have been designed too wide, because it's actually wide enough for a car to get down, which means you've got to like design thinking about the rule breaker and not just the rule followers. So I know people have been driving down that bike lane. They've even parked in it occasionally, and that's really problematic. So, another thing about that bike lane is a lot of native plantings right alongside the bike lane, which sounds great, but it can be visibility barriers for one thing, and it also really annoyed the people who live down there who have to park their cars there, because they don't want to have to open their car door into like grass that's 4 feet tall. So there are ways we can always learn from trial and error, and so it was a great beta test. It's also not long enough to really make a lot of useful connectivity, but there are plans to extend it, and so we need a lot more hard separated bike lanes. I actually would like to see a lot of soft separated ones, separated with flexible barriers, because those are things that we can potentially put in and out seasonally, because it's really hard to plow bike lanes. That's a whole different challenge.
Okay, I'm hearing that it's time for us to wrap up the section, but I do have lots of more bike-related questions, and I know we have folks from the internet who have lots of bike and pedestrian-related questions as well.
Right.
So it's time now for us to take another break. When we return, we'll be answering questions from viewers like you. Take part in the conversation. Send in a question to cityconnection@grcmc.org, or head on over to the Rapidians Instagram and send us a question through our story. Welcome back to City Connection. It's March 3, 2025, and we are joined by Mayor David LaGrand and Arielle Leipham Ellis, the Fulton Heights representative on the Uptown Grand Rapids Inc. board and a member of Friends of Slow Streets. We'll be taking questions from viewers, starting with a question from UAV on Reddit. They ask, how is the city addressing cyclist safety, especially in high traffic areas? How does the city gather and incorporate feedback from cyclists regarding infrastructure and safety? Arielle, do you want to take this one first?
I find it to be a really interesting question. So for me, what's really exciting about that is the community master plan specifically asked about cycling and separated bike lanes, and there was an overwhelmingly positive response. So I'm really excited and curious to see what the city does with that feedback. So there was the bicycle action plan in 2019. So I'm hoping that we can take the feedback from the community master plan and update the bicycle action plan, because kind of seems like the will is there, right, to take the next step.
Before we go on to the next question, I do want to take this time. Can you tell folks about Slow Streets?
Yeah, so this was a group that was really born out of the idea that when these new projects come up for public discussion, sometimes change can be really difficult. Right? It's new. And we thought, what if we started a group that was like, this is amazing, let's cheer this on. So Friends of Slow Streets is myself and about 8 other people, and we put out some visionary documents that we were like, hey, what if we redesign Bridge Street? What if we redesign Leonard? What if we, when they come up for reconstruction? So on our website, friendsofslowstreets.com, we went through and we actually drew our dream map and said, in a perfect world, this is where we would have separated infrastructure. And then we went through and did Street Mix, which is a cool website that anybody can use to redesign a street. So
cool. Street Mix.
Super fun. Yeah, Street Mix.
I do know that there are some reconstruction plans planned for this summer as the summer season is.
Yeah.
Do you know if any of your wish list items made it into any of those reconstruction plans?
So here's what's interesting, that I'm like, this is a passion of mine. I'm not a trained engineer. So the way that I understand it is that those designs are years in the making. So sometimes it can feel like change is really slow, right? But I'm sure there are things on the wish list that made it in, right? Usually it's like segments of streets, because the way the streets, that Vital Streets works now is that they're going to go after streets that have a certain pacer rating, right? And it's not going to be like based on a bicycle network, it's based on the condition of the asphalt. So you get kind of these one-off segments, right, where they do what they can, when they can, with the grant funding that the city has available to it.
Right. So a great example of that is we're going to do some reconstruction of division between Fulton and Michigan. And if you look at the drawings, they're great. And you're like, wow, this is so cool.
Yeah.
There's going to be bike lanes. But then, what's going to happen when you hit Fulton? You're going to be, having to merge into traffic that's going really fast south. So the challenge is, how do you... It's sort of a chicken and egg problem, right? Like, people aren't biking because there isn't the infrastructure, and there isn't the infrastructure because people aren't biking. So figuring out how to activate things like a 4-block section of cycling network, better than not, but not lots of people commute to work on a bike for 4 blocks. If it's 4 blocks, you're gonna walk. So cycling is, I tend to think of cycling as fast walking, not slow driving. So when I cycle, for me it's a substitute for walking. So if I'm thinking, I'd like to walk somewhere, but I don't quite have the time, then I'll use my bike. So when I biked down to City Hall this morning, it's because it's a 1.2 mile walk from my house. I could do it, but it's a little more than 20 minutes, and
leave
whereas it's like
earlier.
5 minutes on the bike, right? So there's where biking makes sense. Now, am I going to bike to, the Meyer on Alpine? Nope. not to get groceries. I'm not, and I'm probably never going to do that. I don't care how good you make the bike lanes, and I'm not biking out to Lake Michigan if I want to go see what the lake's frozen still. So it's a pedestrian substitute, and that means, but it's still true that you got to think, what's the scale and what's the useful scale for cycling, and that's miles, right? Walking is usually blocks, cycling is miles, and cars properly should be tens of miles, at least fives of miles. So making sure that integration happens, that's where some of these low-cost things I think could be useful. Like, could we, for example, do some not so hard separated bike lanes, but could we redraw the lanes on South Division like now? And if we did enough narrowing, could we put in some kind of real buffering for cycling? Yeah, I mean, that's fairly cheap. Paint is cheap. Digging up a street and redoing the sewer lines underneath it, that's really expensive. So there's a logic behind the waiting to do the streets until they are working on the poor condition streets first, looking at the water lines while you're there, looking at all the other infrastructure. But if you want to build an integrated cycling network that people are going to use, making those things connect is a little trickier. And we got to do better work there, I think.
Is there a map showing like how far you can get around the city with just bike lanes?
Oh, like the city's bike lane map?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The map that I was referring to was just, I shouldn't say just, it's the Friends of Slow Streets dream map of what we would do if we were, queens and kings for a day, or like 10 years. But the city absolutely has a map of their bike network. Yeah.
And some of this stuff changes over time, and so sometimes if you beta test something and it really doesn't work, it's good that you beta tested it. So an example is, I don't know if people have seen, they probably have these little, they call them share-ons. It's a picture of a bike with a V above it. There's actually data that shows that makes everything worse for everybody.
Right.
Cyclists get hit more often when those things are on the road.
Interesting.
I mean, which means they're not a good idea, and they're not a substitute for bike lanes. But it seemed like, oh, we don't have room for a bike lane here. We don't have any money. Let's put those things on the street. It sounded like a reasonable idea, right? But sometimes you can have unintended consequences.
And there are always trade-offs.
Yeah.
Even when, everything's great, sometimes you do have to make a trade-off about, convenience versus, right? So.
Yeah. But I also wanted to point out, and this is actually not a bad segue, so Arielle is part of the steering committee for one of our 3 Mayor's Mondays groups, and there's a reason we're talking about this today, because you let me choose what we talk about. We're going to be talking about cycling and infrastructure tonight over at the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and there's a Mayor's Monday website, so you can get all the information about where these things are happening. But this month we're talking about cycling and pedestrian stuff. I would love to hear from everybody in every neighborhood about where they see concern and where they have concern, because there are some places where it probably didn't ever rise to the level of an engineer's concern. But I have a couple areas in my neighborhood when I go for a walk, and I've lived in my neighborhood for a couple decades now. There's still an intersection where I feel like the stop signs are different than I expect. So I find myself, in other words, I find myself walking into an uncontrolled intersection because it feels like there should be a stop sign for the people who are about to run me over, and I make that mistake, and I'm like, oh. Now, if I could make that a 4-way stop, I would love to, because I keep making a mistake there, and I don't know what's in my head coding that as this street should be. I think what in that case what happens is what feels like the dominant street doesn't have the right of way. What feels like the less dominant street gets the stop sign, so it or gets the right of way. So what looks like the dominant street has the stop sign. Now, if you're biking, you make those sort of intuitive guesses all the time, like, oh, they've probably got a stop sign. Well, if you guess wrong in a neighborhood, then really bad things can happen. So, love to hear where people would love to have 4-way stops instead of 2-way stops, which is one of the things I love, because it seems to me that's the cheapest way to get us some good safety. I'd love to hear people thinking about. Here's the other thing: all of those folks out there listening, when you're driving around town, think about places where you're sitting at a light, just waiting for the lights to change, and there's no traffic going. And you're like, man, I could have been through this intersection 30 seconds ago if this was a flashing red. I think there are a lot of intersections in town where a four-way flashing red would be better for bikes, better for cars, better for pedestrians. And we got married to this. I mean, traffic lights are cool. We all, like, they got invented about 100 years ago, and they were better than not traffic lights. But, I mean, they're better than the Wild West. But I think we got over-dependent and sort of over-adoptive of traditional red, yellow, green traffic lights, and I think that we could move way away from them in a lot of places in the city. So love to hear from neighbors, but nobody knows neighborhoods like the people who live in them. So all of those traffic ideas, I'd love to have people start coming to Mayor's Mondays and saying, hey, can you put a four-way stop at this intersection? Or, hey, I think if you got, like one of my candidates is at the corner of MLK and Eastern. I think that light could be four-way flashers and cars would get through there faster. I wouldn't have to wait so often, but if I'm on a bike, I'm way happier to be at a four-way stop than I am to be at a lit intersection, because I can just wait my turn and just be part of everything that happens. And nothing's going to happen fast in a four-way stop. It just doesn't. So the lethality goes way down. It's way safer for pedestrians. So you get lots of really good win-win-wins from four-way stopped intersections. So that's one of the things that I'd love to see us adopt more at the neighborhood level.
Great. Question from Throwaway Burner 3000 on Reddit. What is being done to enforce dangerous traffic violations that put both cyclists and pedestrians in danger?
That's a good question. One of the frustrations that, and I'm going to have to look into our city ordinances, because one of the problems with current enforcement by officers is if a civilian sees something really dangerous, you can't necessarily get action out of it. So the other day, a driver just completely blew a red light, and I called the police, and the answer I got was, well, an officer didn't see it, therefore we can't do anything about it. Now, fortunately, nobody's hurt, there's no accident, so if there had been an accident, there would have been a protocol, right? But an avoided accident is still just as much a danger moment as one that caused an accident, and we should be trying to avoid the accident adjacent things, right? Just like, anyway, so I think that I intend, and I haven't had time to look at how we can allow for civilian witnesses to trigger enforcement on breaking, on those kinds of dangerous events. I also think that one of the things that we really ought to be focusing on is investing a little more in traffic enforcement. That's something that really dipped during COVID, but I know that GRPD is ramping it back up. And there are really basically three ways you can stop accidents. One is street design, and that's one that we've traditionally not talked about at all, not thought about at all. And so it's exciting that finally people are thinking, oh, maybe if we designed our streets better, people wouldn't want to go 55 miles an hour. And that's, I think, probably 60 to 70% of the way to make things safe. Enforcement matters. If you don't ever enforce laws, people don't obey them as well. And so that matters. And then the third is education and, better driver behavior. And so, peer pressure things sometimes work, right? Like there's a reason that the state cops put up billboards saying, hey, by the way, don't get high and drive your car, because we all want to be nice people, right? And so if we're reminded, hey, if you drive through my neighborhood that fast, you're kind of being a jerk. So one of the things I'd like to have is, and Arielle and I have talked about this, is letting neighborhoods buy signs, like speed limit signs that had little comments underneath them, like 25 miles an hour, my mom lives on this block. Or 25 miles an hour, why are you in such a hurry? I think it'd be fun if we had commentary underneath our speed limit signs.
Yeah, or just the signs that say, drive like your kids live here.
Right.
Always a nice reminder too. I know one education question I have, unless I just blanked. No, who has the right of way at crosswalks? Is it the driver or is it the pedestrian?
The answer is it's the pedestrian, but it's very rarely observed. I mean, so that's a culture shift thing that partly we just have to admit that crosswalks are so scantily observed by drivers that we need to have really obvious ways to make it like we're not kidding. So it's great to have those yellow signs that say state law, there's really a crosswalk here. And I think every crosswalk should have one of those like tomorrow, because they're not that expensive. But then the next step up is the instant on flashers, which I love. And I think if we really became a community where essentially every pedestrian crosswalk we cared about, I think pedestrians all deserve to have something they can slap that immediately then turns on flashing lights so that it says, yo, pedestrians are here, don't kill them. I think that's, if we could live in a world where every single crosswalk had one of those, I'd be much happier.
I think this goes back to the question of self-reinforcing design. So really, it should be obvious who has the right of way, right? So that, like, the police can't be everywhere, right? So I know that there's some enforcement questions, and the truth is that right now there's an over-reliance, I think, on a workforce that is already strained. And I think that we can educate, our little hearts out. But at the end of the day, we get people who move, we get folks who move in, right? Things change, we get new drivers on the scene. So we are moving as a culture toward this idea of humans are fallible in street, or I can never pronounce that word right. Humans make mistakes, okay? And we need to design our streets for that. So, enforcement and education, I think, are excellent tools, but they are not all the tools that we have available to us.
Okay. It's time for us now to take another break. When we return, we'll be taking more questions from the public.
It's morning in Grand Rapids. Do you know what's going on in your city? Stay informed about what's happening in your community with The Rapidian, your source for hyperlocal news and information. The Rapidian is a community-focused news source powered by local residents like you. Our volunteer writers and reporters create content that hits close to home about topics like local government, business, schools, events, and people. The Rapidian goes beyond the headlines to provide in-depth coverage of issues that affect Grand Rapids directly, so you can stay in the know. We aim to uplift the community by sharing positive, inspiring stories of growth, progress, and neighborhood pride. The Rapidian is your neighborhood newspaper for the digital age. Follow us on our website and social media to stay connected to your community. This is The Rapidian.
Welcome back to City Connection. We're joined by David LaGrand and Arielle Leipham Ellis, the Fulton Heights representative on the Uptown Grand Rapids Inc. board and a member of Friends of Slow Streets. Taking questions from the public once again. First question, we've got 5 left here. This one comes from Cultivus on Reddit. I hope I pronounced that right. Will there be more enforcement against people riding Lime bikes and scooters on the sidewalks downtown? Funny enough, we were just chatting about that.
Just quickly, yes, I hope so, but also it turns out we can geofence scooters and bikes, which means we can entirely restrict them from being in certain areas. So if we have a big enough problem with them, that's always an option. We can also control their speed. That being said, we are seeing really, really high rates of adoption and not a lot of alarming data about accidents at this point. Now, I say that as someone who's really concerned about this, and I'm concerned about it because my mother lives with us. She has got balance issues. She walks a lot, and the other day she almost got hit by somebody on a scooter. So, like, I'm very sensitized to the issue, but at the same time, it's a huge asset for people to be able to use those things, partly because cars are really, really expensive, and everything we can do to let people do sort of what they call their last mile of transportation, so they can actually, they're a huge way to actually integrate public transit into people's lives. They're a huge way to help people just get around and do their stuff. When I see them, and I get a little annoyed about it, I then try to visualize that person in a 1970s Cadillac driving down my street, and I think, yeah, I was a little annoyed by that scooter, but I'd still rather see that than a 20-foot long or a 40-foot long Cadillac driving down my street.
Yeah.
Can I just quickly say that I also have had the experience of like being with my 5-year-old downtown, and we walk out of a restaurant and a scooter comes by, and I realized, you know what? It's not so much that I mind the scooter itself on the sidewalk. I mean, we can have that conversation. What I minded was the speed. So I think if we could like maybe slow it down, see how that goes, right?
Yep.
Try to test that out and iterate, that could be, that might solve 90% of the issue, right?
Exactly. Right. And so the ability to do that with tech is great, because when we're talking about scooters, mostly we're talking about Lime scooters, right? There are people out there on their own scooters, but there aren't that many of them.
Because again, enforcement is it's so tricky, right? So it's like, what other tools can we use? Plus, enforcement, obviously. So I would love to see this. I know, like in Washington, D.C., I think they go between 5 and 8 miles per hour.
I think ours go up to 10 here.
Yeah. And
I think they go even a little faster than that.
Yeah. So there's a conversation to be had, but again, we're slow streets people.
Yeah.
Like, slower is better.
Slower is better.
We'll keep going. I'll also note, though, they are not an alternative to a safe designated driver home from the bar either.
Touche.
If you are drinking, do not get on a scooter. Chris says, I've been borrowing my brother's electric bike, but I'm not sure if I should be using the bike lanes or the streets. It gets going pretty fast, but I don't feel fully safe driving on the street, which is the correct classification.
That's geeky, partly because I don't know what kind of electric bike we're talking about.
Yeah.
So there's class 1, class 2, class 3. The simple answer is, if you're on the sidewalk, you always have to yield to pedestrians. So it's not illegal to be on the sidewalk, but you absolutely have to yield to pedestrians. That is the law.
He was saying bike lane, or they were saying bike lane or street, though.
Oh, well, I think they maybe meant sidewalk, but like, why? I don't know why they wouldn't feel safe going in a bike lane.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can, well, kind of to your point earlier, sometimes the bike lane is there and you're like, who's going to use that bike lane, right?
Right.
So like,
Or
sometimes being in the street.
If it's got a battery and you're going a little bit faster than maybe another cyclist in the bike lane, maybe you want to be in the street.
I use an e-bike, and one of the reasons I use it is because I can pretty much match car speeds, and that's really nice, because then I just don't yield to cars. I'm just being a car speed unit on the streets. But I get that that's also a little scary. I'm used to going 25 miles an hour because I did a lot of aggressive cycling in my youth, and I still do. So an e-bike doesn't make me any faster than I could go on my really fast bike, but it just means I don't have to sweat while I do it.
It's not as tough. From Guardian 667, so many sixes and sevens. Guardian on Reddit. Will Grand Rapids begin with hostile vehicle architecture to actually improve biker and pedestrian safety, i.e. raise pedestrian crosswalks, one-way vehicle spikes?
Oh, one-way vehicle spikes. Hadn't heard that one
No, never
floated
heard that
I don't know what
before.
that one is either.
No, that sounds
You
kinda
know, I
scary.
don't know that I would call it hostile vehicle architecture. It might be, right? Like, we're all adults here. I think we can handle nuance. But I would say that in my mind, that's more pro-pedestrian and pro-cyclist infrastructure. Because for me, first and foremost, I am a driver, right? So these sorts of measures are good for drivers, they're good for pedestrians, and they're good for cyclists. I know that if I'm driving and it's snowy and it's slippery, I don't want to slide into a cyclist, right? And I want to make sure that I'm driving slow and I'm not getting, distracted listening to my radio or my kids are squawking in the back seat, right? Like, I'm like, oh yeah, right, I'm on a slow street, I'm on Monroe Center, I'm inherently, right, like part of my subconscious is going slowly. So I see this as pro everybody, to be quite honest. I don't see it as a bad thing to slow folks down.
From IP Suites on Reddit, does the city have any plans to create a safe way for cyclists to cross the Beltline or 96 east of town?
Oh, boy.
What a dream.
Exactly.
I love it. I love this idea. Mayor, can you do anything about that?
Can you imagine the cost?
Everything's expensive.
Yeah, well, and when I think about, I love the idea of actually raised cycling and pedestrian options places, and when you see them, they're such a joy. But we could do one, but then I feel like, well, we should have 20. Sort of like, it gets down to the downsides of now. The Beltline is a collar road, and I don't think you can really get around having collar roads around cities. What first on my line of things to worry about is the 131, because the 131 just is a barrier that runs right down the middle of our town and may as well be, the Marineris Trench for all that it's crossable by anybody other than a car. Periphery of our town is probably a lower priority. But I'd love to see, I'm always worried about that. And, when I went to Calvin College, and when I was there, somebody got killed trying to cross the East Beltline. And, it's really, really dangerous. It's a highway. So Calvin, that's why Calvin did their overpass thing. It was after that fatality. And it's not cheap, but it'd be great to see more of those and to be able to afford more of them.
I would just like to maybe see the ability to cross the East Beltline at grade.
You can do it as though you're a car, right? You can be in if you're on
I don't think reasonably
Cascade
though.
or Burton.
I don't think on foot.
Oh, was that an on-foot question?
Or on bike, I just, whatever.
Yeah. It's not easy.
No.
Another question from IP Suites on Reddit. Does the city have any plans to create you're right.
That was the last question?
No, one last question. How is the city funding cycling infrastructure and programs, and are there any new funding sources being considered?
That's a great question. The simple answer is we do have a streets millage, and some of that money can be used. We use it for streets projects generally, and we've got a general budget, and we can use money from that. We also potentially can bond. And so we have had some very initial discussions about the bonding potential. And cycling is, and I want to actually talk for a little bit, because we haven't talked a lot about pedestrian friendliness, but I think we've got miles to go in making Grand Rapids really, really an easy place to walk. And there's a lot to be done there. So for all that I'm pro-cyclist, the fact of the matter is I can walk in 8 inches of snow. I can't bike in 8 inches of snow. Frankly, I maybe can't even drive in 8 inches of snow. Walking is the most flexible, lowest tech option, as long as you don't have physical limitations, right? If you're able to do it, walking is kind of amazing. But we need a lot more. We need to think about mid-block crossings for pedestrians and not just at intersections, because it's much safer. We need to think about ways that we can generally really slow people down and make an intersection safer, but Yeah, and I forget what the last question was. I'm sorry, folks.
It's okay. Can you?
It's not up on our prompter.
Funding.
Funding and- yeah, you're talking
So
about
potentially we could
funding.
bond, but it's also true that a lot of our city doesn't have sidewalks in it.
Right.
Like
We
a
have
lot of our city
gaps, yeah.
does, but we have really non-trivial gaps. And that's such an important part of like living in your neighborhood. Is like being able to go for a walk after dinner and not walk in your neighbor's grass. Like it'd be really nice if we had much more comprehensive sidewalks.
And that is
in town.
something the city's been working on, expanding the sidewalk.
It is, but we've got a long way to go. It costs about $1 million a mile, and there are miles of sidewalks we need to do, many miles. So, and you know, for all that I would rather build a world where cyclists can be integrated into the roadways and not the sidewalk ways, sidewalks where you don't have any sidewalk is something that at least gives you some options. And we all like, you know, if my 5-year-old's learning how to ride a bike, I don't want them riding on the street. I want them to ride on the sidewalk. So sidewalks are inevitably part of the cycling culture to some extent, because nobody wants their 5-year-old or their 6-year-old or their 7-year-old riding unsupervised on the street. If they're going to their friend's house to play, you want them to be, they want a bike, you want them biking on the sidewalk.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Well, it is time now for the end of the show. That's all the time that we have for today. So thank you to both of our guests for coming in and giving your insight on biking and pedestrian safety here in Grand Rapids. And thank you to all of you at home for tuning in, and for those of you who sent in questions. Don't forget, you can always watch rebroadcasts throughout the month of March on cable GRTV's Channel 25 or GRTV's YouTube page. See you next month, Grand Rapids.